Runs with Courage, Chapter 3, Brave. Loud clanging startled me awake, and I opened my eyes to see the sun streaming into the room. At first, I couldn't remember where I was, but then the sounds of the other girls brought memories rushing back. "You must dress," I heard hushed Lakota, and looked up to see a girl who called herself Waxtall peering at me. Her hair was loose from its braids, and I could see that it ended beneath her shoulders in a neat straight line. I shuddered. It had been cut. I took a step back and shook my head no. "You must," she whispered. "It's the rule here." She went to the small trunk by my sleeping space and pulled out a dress. "But they are not my clothes," I said loudly and angrily. All movement in the room stopped, every pair of eyes turning to me. Another girl leaned close to my face. "Never speak Lakota out loud," she whispered fiercely. "Never. It's against the rules." I clutched the front of my dress Mother had made me. It was soft and held the scent of prairie. I pulled it over my head and laid it across the bed, then stepped into the dress that had been left for me. It felt coarse and scratchy against my skin. It was unlike anything I had ever worn before, and I wondered what kind of animal it had come from. It was pink in color, dotted with small flowers that didn't look anything like real flowers. "That is not allowed," Waxtall whispered, pointing to my wota, which was around my neck. "But," I said, grasping it in my hand. "They will take it from you if they see it," she continued. Carefully, I pulled the small pouch over my head and tucked it inside my deerskin dress, next to the small wooden rabbit for keepsafing. I did not want the whites to take these things from me. The other girls sat and began to put on foot coverings. I searched beneath my sleeping space and found my own pair. I pulled one out and studied it. It was black and hard with small strings running along the side. I looked down to the moccasins I was still wearing. They formed to my feet perfectly. I watched the other girls pull the strings in through small clasps on either side of their foot coverings. I slipped off my moccasins and picked up one of the coverings, forcing my foot down into its hard, rigid shape. Instantly, my toes cried out in pain. I tried to wiggle them, but I couldn't. When I stood, I couldn't even walk. I pulled my foot covering off and tossed it beneath the sleeping space, angry again that I could not wear my own clothes. I would wear the dress, but for this day I would go without anything on my feet. The girls began leaving the room, and I followed them all the way down the strange stacked pieces of wood and into the large open space. I looked up and realized the sleeping place was above us, and shuddered. How could one place stay above another without crashing down? The girls continued through the large space and into a smaller room where there were two large thin pieces of wood. Each was held up off the ground by wooden legs. Every girl went to one and pulled something away, sitting down on it. It did not appear that they were going to sit on the ground and eat. It looked as if we were meant to eat off the long pieces of wood. One of the women came to me and smiled, pointing to show that I could sit at one of the long pieces of wood. "Table," she said. I hesitated. I had never seen something so high off the ground that I was supposed to sit on. Two girls from the night before beckoned me towards them. I carefully lowered myself to sit. They smiled briefly, then turned back and whispered to each other. "They are sisters," Waxtall whispered in Lakota. "They talk more to each other than to anyone else." I nodded, looking at them again and realizing that they did look like sisters. The woman who had brought me into the school the night before came to me and pulled my leg away from the table, pointing to my bare foot. Angrily, I yanked my leg back, but she grabbed it again and spoke in a loud white words. Another woman came over and shook her head, saying words back. They both turned away. "You are lucky," Waxtall said to me in Lakota. "Miss Beatrice told Miss Agnes that she thinks it is okay for you to go without shoes today." "Is that what the foot coverings are called?" I asked. She nodded, and I nodded back, but I did not feel lucky. I realized the other girls were staring at me, and I shoved my feet beneath the table, feeling my cheeks grow warm from anger and embarrassment. Then all of the girls grew quiet, folded hands, and looked down. One woman began to speak, and the girls joined her, murmuring the same words she was speaking. I had never heard speaking where everyone says the same words at the same time. Most of my Tiospaz songs were made up as needed to tell what was happening or what had happened. I loved our songs and our dances. I looked around at the other girls and felt a sharp pinch in my ear. The woman who had grabbed my foot towered over me, glaring, her fingers ready to pinch again. I quickly pressed my hands together and looked down like everyone else. The speaking finished, and the girls began to eat. I touched the small round object sitting in front of me and watched, fascinated, as the girls took food from a large bowl and put it on their own round circles. I realized they were circles to eat from. I rubbed mine, feeling how smooth it was. It did not feel like anything I had touched before. When I tapped it with my finger, I heard a soft clicking sound. I picked it up too to discover it was light and smooth on the bottom. Two long silver pieces of metal lay on each side of my eating circle. I watched to see what the other girls were doing. They were using the metal pieces to put food in their mouths. The pieces looked a little like spoons that I was used to. I picked up one, but found I couldn't make it do what I wanted it to do. It was too thin and too long. In frustration, I set it down on the table and crossed my arms. I didn't need to eat. Here, Waxtall whispered in Lakota, handing me a small piece of food. This is bread. Eat this. It's easier. Thank you, I mumbled, grateful for the help. The bread was warm in my hand. It looked like nothing I had eaten before. I sniffed it and tore a small piece away. The outer cover was crunchy, but it was soft inside. Miss Beatrice made it today, Waxtall said, watching me. It's one of her favorite special recipes. Try it. It's delicious. I took a small bite and discovered it tasted a little sweet. It tasted so good I hungrily gobbled the entire piece. I put my hands in my lap, waiting quietly. You can eat more, Waxtall whispered, pointing to the bowl that was still filled with bread pieces. Are you sure? I whispered back. I couldn't believe this was possible. She nodded. There's no hunger here. I had never been able to eat so much. I had always finished my meal almost as hungry as when I had started. I took bite after bite, almost afraid if I stopped eating, the food would disappear. But as soon as one bowl of bread was empty, more bread would appear. It was as if the food was growing from the bowl itself. How I wished Bear could be here and eat as much as he wanted. When the other girls started to leave, I followed, but I felt my stomach clench in pain from the bread I had eaten. I sat back down, doubling over, trying not to throw up. The woman who had pinched my ear took my arm and led me back to our sleeping room. She pointed to my sleeping space, and I sat. Then she turned and left. If I were with my Tiospa, one of my aunts would have given me a piece of medicine bark to chew on. An aunt would have sat with me and helped soothe my stomach. Instead, I sat alone on my strange, high-up sleeping space, trying to ignore the pain. Suddenly, I smelled smoke and jumped up, panicked, trying to find what was burning. I could see nothing inside that was on fire, so I went to the small clear space in the wall that you could look through. Outside, the ground below, a boy with short hair was throwing clothes into the flames of the fire. No, I had said, when I realized he had my deerskin dress my mother had made for me. I ran back to my sleeping space and tore the blanket and pillow away, hoping to find my clothes where I had left them, but there was nothing there. Back at the clear space, I looked down to see the ends of my dress being consumed by the flames. Mother's wota and Bear's rabbit along with it. No, stop! I yelled, and I realized the white boy couldn't hear me. No! I pounded my fist against the clear space. The boy looked up briefly, and I jumped back. He was not white. His skin color and eyes were the same as mine. He was Lakota, but his hair was short, like that of the white men. I laid back on my sleeping space. The white food had become a large lump in my stomach, and I tried to ignore the nausea. The only thing I had had from home had been reduced to ash. I curled up into a ball and cried myself to sleep. When I awoke, my stomach felt better. The sun had traveled far down in the sky, and the light outside was fading. I went to the clear space to see if the boy was still there, but all I could see was the dim light was a pile of burned logs. There was a rustle behind me, and I jumped. The woman who had made the bread was standing in the doorway, Miss Beatrice. She struck a match and lit the oil lamps, and walked over to my sleeping space and sat down, touching a place next to her. I approached cautiously and stood near her. She patted the place again, and I sat. Words came from her mouth, and even though I couldn't understand them, I could tell that they were words of kindness. From within her long black dress, she pulled out a small piece of bread and offered it to me. Just seeing the bread made my stomach turn. I shook my head forcefully. The other girls came in, and the women greeted them, talking white words. The girls answered, also using white words. They each crawled into their sleeping spaces, and the woman walked around, touching the girls' heads and speaking to them softly. Her hand lingered when she came near me. She patted me on the shoulder, and then blew out the lamps one by one, and the room fell to darkness. She's one of the nice ones, Waxtall whispered. She doesn't hit us. She was speaking in Lakota. You get hit here? I whispered back, horrified. Sometimes. Someone else answered from the other side. In the dark, it was just voices detached from bodies. If we talk Lakota or break a rule, Waxtall answered. Why would Uncle and Father send me to such a place? I asked. No one answered. In the dim outline of the moon, I could just make out the man hanging on the wall, broken and bleeding, reminded me to follow the rules.